Hey, podcast listeners. This podcast is brought to you by Pineview Insurance Group. When I sold my company, I wasn't really sure what I should be doing. I started buying a rental property. I started buying a car, and I didn't really know what I needed to do from an insurance standpoint. But that stuff is very, very important. Me and a lot of my founder friends, after selling a business, we have no idea what we should be doing insurance-wise, and that's where Pineview Insurance Group comes in. So after selling his insurance company for $435 million, Mike Lloyd started this new company. I highly recommend it. It really does an audit on your assets and tells you what you should be investing in terms of insurance. So this is everything from your auto, your home, your umbrella policy, and much, much more. So if you guys are curious about working with an insurance group that's geared towards entrepreneurs, I recommend Pineview. You can get access to Pineview's new member waitlist at pvig.com/made-it. Again, that's pvig.com/made-it. Cheers, guys.
Welcome to Made It with Connor Tompkins.
Hey, everyone. I'm here with Lewis Schiff. He's an author, exited founder, went through the .com highs and lows, and is currently the chairman of the Birthing Giants Fellowship Program and doing a bunch of stuff, really helping enable founders and helping them scale, grow, and hopefully exit. So, Lewis Schiff, really excited to have you on the pod.
Thanks, Connor. I appreciate it. You and I have had a chance to interact now a bunch of times. I'm really enjoying it.
We were doing quite a few things. We were doing the Exit Summit this last week, which was helping founders kind of find their exit path. We were talking to them about what it means to be a tiny giant, a big giant, an in-between giant, everything in between. I think it went well. Thanks for being our keynote on the last session. A lot of people got a lot from it.
I totally get energized, as many people like us do, hanging out and talking to entrepreneurs.
I think everyone just has like an interesting story, that you want to jump into, and you're like, what are you starting this? Why? Why would you do this? Right? It's not always the easiest path. But I want to hear a little bit about how did you get into this in the first place? Because you had some companies that you were the CEO of pretty early on, and you've done quite a bit over the past 30 years. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that origin story.
I've almost never worked for anybody. I mean, I have for brief periods here and there for a couple of years. But for the most part, I'm that punk kid who worked for himself and came up with crafty ways to make money. But by the time the .com era came around, which is, people forget the economics of the .com era was basically page views, or in some cases downloads. And so the value of your company was pretty much determined by how many people you could get to come to your site or how many people you can get to download something. There are times when something new happens, and I was part of one of those in the .com era, where I was building websites, as all my colleagues were, all my peers, to try to attract attention. And of course, you could attract attention the wrong way, and you could attract attention the right way. I was fascinated with and remain largely kind of focused on how people create wealth, especially in America, and how American economic mobility works. And so back then, this is now 1997 I started, or 96, 97, I started this endeavor where I was trying to use the web, which was weird back then. I mean, not a lot of people had access to it, to teach people how to manage their money. Now, that sounds incredibly commonplace now, but I was one of the first people who did it. And I was one of the first people who did it by showing their actual portfolio, the dollars and cents of their portfolio and what they did and when they moved it. And you got to remember the era, that was a point where we didn't use our real name in our email because we were afraid that Russian hackers would get it or something. We
also don't talk about money, right? So you're putting yourself out there in a few different ways.
Everybody was like, are you crazy? People are going to get your information. The Russians will get it. It was just a kind of a thing of the times. It's funny because one of the board members on Birthing of Giants, my school, is a guy named Jim McCann, who runs and started 1-800-Flowers. 1-800-Flowers has the unique distinction of being the very first e-commerce site that accepted a credit card on AOL, on America Online. He was selling flowers. And to get you to put your credit card on, you had to guarantee everything. I guarantee I will get you the flowers. I guarantee if you lose money, I will make sure you don't lose money. So similarly, when I was teaching people how to invest using my own portfolio, real dollars, it was just kind of a bold idea, at the time. I sold that company to a company called iVillage, which ended up going public on the NASDAQ and then ended up being bought by NBC. So it went through two liquidity events, and I participated in those.
Lewis, can you share some numbers around what that exit was like for you and for the company?
Yeah, well, basically, I did not break 8 figures in that deal. I was like 27 at the time, but I didn't break. I got to the tippy top of 7 figures there.
That's still your first exit. That's still like, in some ways, starting you into your next phase of life, right?
I would say I'm more lucky than smart because I threw a lot of that money into some real estate development in Manhattan. That definitely more lucky than smart because the developers were idiots. They did build though, and then they couldn't finish. There's a whole process in New York City about how you actually get what's called a certificate of occupancy that the attorney general has to give you. Anyway, they couldn't get it, and they couldn't get it, and they couldn't get it, and they couldn't get it. But meanwhile, the price of the apartments in New York was just rising. So they were like 2 years late in opening up this finished building, and our value of our investment had doubled in the meantime. So, that stuff happens too.
Without people even living in it, right? Like without even having the certificate.
Oh yeah, no, because you can't legally sell it or rent it until it's certified. Yeah. Those are some examples. I had some other exits in the meantime. Today, through Birthing of Giants, which is a school for entrepreneurs, we are doing something we never planned on doing, which is participating in fundraising rounds for some of our students' companies. It was never really on the roadmap, but our graduates loved each other and they wanted to do things with and for each other. And somebody calls them, they call founders funds. So as a result of that, Birthing of Giants does have a lot of equity in a lot of really interesting companies that are growing pretty fast.
You've done a few things that a lot of entrepreneurs think about. So whenever you sell a company, most people go to angel investing or building a community. And you've done that on both sides. You've started a community and you've started angel investing. How is that going so far?
The angel investing since 2022. So we don't really expect any exits for, another 3 or 4 years. That would be lucky. But you got to understand the way we do it is we take companies that are already doing well. So imagine, a simple example. Imagine a roofing company. Everybody knows what a roofing company does. They put roofs on houses, right? Physical, manual labor with some technical skills behind it. That roofing company decided to become a digital satellite imagery company that allowed roofers to be able to price roofs by using satellite imagery rather than physically have to go to the house. Now think about what that technology company, that technology of the roofing digital pricing program is. It's run by a company and a team that's been doing this for years. They know their domain deeply. They have a reputation. And so the only tricky part is the building of the technology, which is always tricky. When they ask us to invest in that kind of company, what we call the fail factors have been dramatically reduced. The team is in place. The domain knowledge is already there. The reputation and brand is there. And the capital is all they're missing. We are 3 or 4 years away probably from exits, but I have very little expectation that we won't exit probably 100% of these companies because they don't have the usual angel fail factors.
That's interesting. And you're getting more exposure on these companies than taking a couple intro calls and writing a check, right? They're going through your program. You understand a little bit more about the founder and the company. And it's also playing on a trend almost of you have these basic traditional Main Street companies that are very scalable. It's very easy to add companies into them, but then you're adding in this technology element, which is hard for them, right?
It is hard.
For a lot of companies, if you're a services business, it's hard to add on tech. If you're a tech business, it's hard to add on services.
Totally.
Or product. You're not built that way. And I'm seeing this across the board. So I'm seeing it like there's cameras on ranches and they're taking videos of cattle and they're talking about how healthy the cattle is. You can see the cattle before you make a purchase. It's finding those niches and then applying this like layer on top of it. Is that what you're seeing most inside your cohort program now?
Huge, just like you described it. Huge application of technology to do what labor used to do. And it's quite dramatic.
I'm a little curious if this is like the next kind of wave that we're going to see. And then I'm guessing some people are going to butt heads, right? And then that comes down to more of distribution and then how much money do you raise for marketing purposes. But I can see this setting up for a roll up.
I mean, new technology is a little like the dot-com era that I was in. It's the metrics are what they are. Like in the case of the early dot-com days, it was page views. But then they become, as you said, EBITDA and revenue. And so that's sort of the maturation of a business. There's a word that you've heard called logos. I mean, in a business plan context, add logos. So there's a lot of businesses that are saying you got to add logos, which means add like clients that people recognize so that you can say, oh, one of my clients is Google. One of my clients is Facebook. and it's adding logos. It's not currency, but it's a form of currency that's very popular right now.
I think it's fantastic because once you have a logo, right, you're like, what else does this logo need? And how else can I sell into that logo, right? So
now you're thinking like a person trying to create a profit. Yeah, but
yeah.
First it's logos. So you'll discount, your service just to get their logo on your website.
One of the things I think is unique about your background is you've written a decent number of books: Business Brilliant, The First Habit, The Middle Class Millionaire, The Armchair Millionaire. Can you tell me about how you decided to write these books, and then what impact has it had on your career? Are you doing this to help flow into the fellowship program? Is this currently something that was top of mind and you figured, hey, I might as well put this in between two covers and see I can extend my reach? What was the reasoning behind it?
They always represent topics where I'm just deeply curious, that have something to do with my business life. And so, again, one way or another, it's always been one question, which is, how does economic mobility happen in America? And it contained within that little question is a lot. For example, contained in that question is the word America. People have no idea how easy it is, comparatively speaking, to build a successful business in America in comparison to almost any other country in the world. Access to capital and access to, tools. It's just crazy easy. Economic mobility in America is really it's a somewhat patriotic concept. This American experiment is a place where this thing called capitalism can thrive. And we know that where capitalism thrives, poverty is diminished. Those two things always go together. And not everyone sees it the same way. And there's a lot of kind of, in my little nerd corner of the world, there's controversy around whether capitalism leads to a diminishment of poverty. But, I can produce my own evidence that suggests that it's worthwhile. So the books have been me constantly looking at a different angle of the question. The first book I wrote was Armchair Millionaire, which basically was the absolute democratization of investing. So let's say you're a person with $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, and you say, I want to make this money work for me, which, by the way, is a wildly American concept that you could get your money to work for you. And it's sort of the beginning and the end of every success story is getting your money to work for you. So I wrote about how you can get your money to work for you. And it was called The Armchair Millionaire, meaning sit back and let it do the work and you'll have $1 million. Now, in the year 2000, when the book came out, the style of investing I was talking about represented about 5% of investable assets dedicated to the public markets. Today, it's 50%. It's the biggest asset class in the history of the world with the most trillions of dollars in the history of the world. So I'm not saying it was because of a book or anything like that. I'm saying I did get it right. 25 years ago, I said, this is the way to do it. And then everyone did it. That book was about how you could make money by sitting back and letting your money work for you. The next book was Middle Class Millionaire, which was the idea that you could make money by following a very specific American group called the Middle Class Millionaire. The Middle Class Millionaire is someone whose value system is middle class because that's where they grew up, but whose business success is, leads to them becoming millionaires. And so there's a nexus, compared to, let's say, somebody who grew up with a ton of money.
Right. So how would you classify this group? What are some of their traits?
Well, first of all, they represent about 10% of the population. They have net worths of, in my example, back in 2005, when I wrote it, it was $1 million to $10 million. Their traits are that they are extremely hardworking, meaning they literally put in more hours. It's funny. I just read a Federal Reserve paper. It's like 100 pages long, written by 3 professors, that concluded that people who work more hours do better in business. So the book, The Middle Class Millionaire, was based on research, meaning I called 5,000 people to get the information. 500 of them, or 800 of them were actual middle class millionaires, and about 4,000 of them were just regular middle class people. And so hard work, meaning flat out hours at work, hard work. The second was the ability to tolerate failure, or what's called resilience, elasticity, the ability to bounce back. And the third is willingness to refine what you do in your business life based on what you've learned about yourself. So if you've discovered you're bad at something, stop doing it. And if you've discovered you're good at something, do more of it. Now, why is that crazy? Because in corporate America, you sit in your HR department for your performance review, and they say things like, hey, Connor, you're not so good at this. We want you to get better at it. Yeah, so put the 3 together. Work more hours, bounce back from failure more often, and do more of what you're good at and less of what you're bad at. Those are the traits of wealth creators. that come from little to nothing.
One of the things that we talked about during the exit seminar is talking about dry powder and how this is like the best time to be an entrepreneur. Can you expand on that a little bit? What characteristics makes this the best time to be a founder?
There's three very different trends that are occurring kind of in the world as we know it, but particularly in America. One is that there's actually population decline, which it takes a little bit of a moment to realize that population decline also means fewer entrepreneurs, fewer people, fewer entrepreneurs, fewer companies. So there's fewer companies as a result of population decline. So now you have fewer people and fewer companies to buy. The second is you have more money than ever that wants to buy those companies. Okay. So you have more wealth that's transforming from one generation to the next, transitioning. It's in the trillions and it's got to find a place to land. I mean, it's funny about algorithms because once you start following a topic, it seems like all you ever get fed in your newsfeed is that topic. So you think the whole world is reading what you're reading. But my little algorithm tells us I watch the wealth transformation from one generation to the next. And it's just, you just got to imagine, a container full of something where it's spilling out and they've got to get it into whatever it's intended for. And so that money is intended for investing. And one of the newest, best places to put it is in private companies. You got fewer companies and more money than ever. And then the third one is a bit trippy. It's basically the idea that what you just said, and you and I were talking about with that roofer, the idea that everyone's company can be incredibly kind of amped up, turbocharged through the right application of technology. And that could be as simple as, Connor, you want to write an email to someone today and you kind of bounce over to ChatGPT and say, hey, would you write an email about this topic? And it spits it over to you. And what would have taken you 45 minutes takes you 5 minutes. That's the use of technology that should benefit your business in the long run because you've done something faster. Or maybe you have someone who works for you who uses that so they can do more in their 8-hour day. Or you're the full-on tech company. You're like that roofer who switches from being a roofer to being a digital pricing mechanism. One way or another, there's just almost never been a generation where tech was as available as it is and has the ability to change the way we do business. So when you put the three together, fewer companies, more money to buy those companies, and all of us have a roughly equal shot at using tech to make our companies more valuable to that market of money.
There's two trends that I think are relatively interesting. So one trend is it's the easiest it's ever been to do a software product. And so the EBITDA multiples that you used to get on a SaaS product is probably going to go down, more saturation in the market. I'm seeing more hardware get funded than if combining hardware with software because the level of difficulty is increasing. The other thing that's interesting is you were talking about wealth transfer. Like from one generation to another is a really, really big trend. There's a lot of wealth that's built up, private equity firms, venture capital firms, but also just in general with a lot of businesses that with the aging population that need to find new homes. What do you think is happening with that trend? How do you think is the best way to tap into that?
There's these things called founders funds, which I think are fascinating. They're not that popular. I mean, they exist and they're out there. They should be, I think, 10 times more popular than they are, where people are putting money together to buy a company and then buy 5 more of them. So buy the dry cleaner in your neighborhood and then buy 10 more dry cleaners in your neighborhood. And then actually operate that dry cleaning business because the owner of that business is 70 years old. So you took him out and you took the next one out, and the next one out. So you're 40 and you took out, 10 dry cleaners and now you own a dry cleaning business. I mean, this is kind of a colorful example, but the guy that bought Pabst Blue Ribbon, Pabst Blue Ribbon was like an old school beer for when I was a high school kid. And he bought all these brands that had deteriorated value because they had lost their way or their popularity. He bought Hostess, which was the makers of Twinkies and stuff. He bought, Pabst Blue Ribbon and 100 other brands at deep discounts. And then he nurtures them and runs them and it pulls cash out of them. And every once in a while, he ends up with a PBR, a Pabst Blue Ribbon that ends up being a hit. But even if he doesn't, because God help us if we're eating Twinkies anymore, but he makes a lot of money by saying this old stuff is actually valuable. So a founder's fund would be a person or 2 or 3, or maybe a person whose parents have some money, whatever, who says, I'm going to buy an actual old school business and run it like an old school business. And by the way, I would add to that, wait for the moment where technology is going to change everything and try to insert it into the business. But until that moment arrives, just run it like a good cash flow business.
I think there's still a gap in finding these companies in the first place because generations communicate differently. There's not a lot of education around some of this stuff as much as you would think. You mentioned that you would think that there would be 10 times more founders funds than there are now.
By the way, I used the wrong phrase. It's search funds, not founders funds, search funds.
That makes sense. I'm seeing search funds on the rise. So like whenever you're graduating with your MBA, I'm seeing a lot more of them go into search funds than private equity and venture capital as far as like a ratio. They're still definitely going into those spaces, still very popular, but a lot of them are doing search funds. There's a couple companies that gather search funds together in a way that's very easy to kind of raise that capital. But I would still say the same thing. It's still not as prevalent as you would think.
Well, listen, if you go get a job in private equity, you're getting a salary from day one. And if you start a search fund, you're not. So that's it. That's a lot of people make decisions on that simple basis. But I also think like geographic search funds are cool, meaning let's say you live in Maine and you want to start buying businesses located in Maine. You know what I mean? Like that's fun. That's a fun thing to do. If I think I got it right when it came to index funds, but 25 years ago, here's the next thing I think is going to happen. They're called founder-friendly funds or founder-friendly capital, which is the idea that if there's too much capital chasing too few companies, the capital providers are going to have to change the terms of the deal or their offers, or else the entrepreneurs will just say no. I mean, there's a dribble of companies that will always say yes, because there's always some 75-year-old person out there who's ready to sell. But if you really need to move money faster, you need to change the terms, because most entrepreneurs are always stuck with this dilemma. They're going to pay me what? And I have to do what to earn it? Screw it. I'll just keep doing it, And so they say no. But the concept of founder-friendly capital where they change the terms, and I've been tracking these 8 deal sheet terms that I think make money more founder-friendly.
You want to hit on those 8 terms?
So the first is the concept of a buyback provision. So the idea that if the marriage between you and your capital partner doesn't work out, you can buy them back. It's not easy to do because, you have to come up with a lot of money to do it, but it still means you can get away from somebody who turns out not to be the right person. The second is long-term capital. I mean, most entrepreneurs don't think about the agenda of their buyer, but the agenda of their buyer is that somebody has given them money and then they've put it in your company and then they've turned it into this thing called stock, but it's not cash. You can't buy a cup of coffee with a share of a private company. So at some point, you got to hand the money back to the original investor and say, I'm giving you your cash back. And so that there's a period of time that's acceptable. And it's typically something like 5 to 10 years that an investor gives it to a private equity fund gives it to you. You might have to give it back to them in cash in, let's say, 5 years. It's different for each fund. 5 years may not be enough runway for you to do what you want to do. So long-term capital would be them saying, we're going to let you have 10 years, 20 years. We might never ask for the money back. I mean, it's just a different way of doing business. Long-term capital. The next one is no earnouts. So, earnouts are part of a deal. You sell your company for $10 million, but you only get 7 now. You have to perform for the next 3 years or whatever. I'm making up all the numbers. And then you can get the rest of the money. And the problem is, depending on what those private equity firms are like, they may engineer it so you never actually get the 3 million or some portion of it. So that you can imagine a private meeting of these devilish private equity people saying, we're telling him we're paying 10 million, but we're really only paying 7 million because we're going to make sure he never earns the earnout because we're going to cut his marketing budget and cut his sales force. And we're really buying it for $7 million, folks. And you're like, I'm going to try and do it. And they're like, you're never going to do it.
In many ways, there's a lot of things outside of your control and the private equity firm's control. It could be the market. It could be the team. It could be countless other things. But the main point is that you're not in control.
Yeah. Your main point is you're not in control. And no, you're right. Of course, there's all sorts of genuinely good reasons why earnouts don't get achieved. I was like officially read into the private equity world when they told me about a well-understood phenomenon in the private equity world that entrepreneurs don't know about, called the hosing at the closing. All the ways they change the terms on the last weeks and the last day to hose you.
Which is one of the reasons why we need to know about the 8 different things that make for founder-friendly capital.
By the way, people should act well and they should demonstrate character and they should do the right thing. I don't like when people do bad things in the pursuit of, capital. But of course, it's a tough game. It's a bare knuckles game. It's just that hosings at the closing, that's not bare knuckles. That's just crappy.
Yeah. And a lot of times these people have reputations that they want to maintain and they want to be right by you. If people ask you, how did it go whenever you sold your company to X? they want you to say favorable things.
So the other one is, and this is a huge one, is that some funds are now offering to buy less than 50% of your company so that you retain control. And there's all sorts of really good models where they trust you, you trust them. And so this is a big deal because almost every private equity fund calls you and says, we have to own somewhere between 51 and 100% of this business or else we won't do it. But what about 49 or 40 or 30? It's a really cool idea that's working very well. This one is kind of silly, is called cash outs, no limits. Sometimes when you sell your company for a lot of money, but you stay on as the CEO, the buyers will tell you what you cannot do with your money. They'll say that you can't buy that house in Europe because they don't want you that far from the office and stuff like that. You know who this was the most egregious, but we saw it, is Jeff Bezos, a powerful guy, who was the CEO and chairman of Amazon, but also owned Blue Origin. And you can tell the day or the week after he was released as chairman, in other words, he ended his official chairmanship and CEO for Amazon, he also announced that he was going to be going up on Blue Origin. That's because his board said, no, you're not going up in space while you're the CEO of this company. I don't care how powerful you are, Mr. Bezos. You are not allowed to do this. So it's not like it doesn't happen at all levels, but, if you can arrange it so that you're not told what to do with your money, that's a nice thing. Another one is, no board seats. So the idea that these folks end up on your board, and sometimes you don't want them there. Sometimes you do. Growth assistance, the idea that they'll essentially put their smart people to work for you to help you acquire companies, lawyers and accountants and people searching for firms like we were talking about earlier. And then access to debt at preferred rates. They have bankability at a level that guys like you and I don't. And so they can access debt at lower interest rates. So, these are just different things that show up. I think when you talk to your buddy, when anyone talks to their buddies about private equity, it's always, what's the multiple? What's the multiple? What's the multiple? Which is a really macho way of saying, how valuable a company did you build? It's about time that entrepreneurs started learning more about the money that they're expecting to get and kind of driving this founder-friendly asset growth class.
And it also gives you more flexibility because in some cases, if you raise money, you have to kind of shoot that narrow gap of you need to grow really fast, but sometimes these are long-term decisions and sometimes your company doesn't fit that mold, and the pressure from the board means that you have to shoot a very narrow kind of window of possibility to exit in that, who knows, maybe 3 to 6 year time frame, right?
Yeah.
And that's incredibly hard.
Well, that's the work we do at Birthing of Giants, is we essentially say, what's your goal for this company? I mean, there's an old school belief that if you're in the role of helping somebody do something, like you're a financial advisor, or in our case at Birthing of Giants, we help entrepreneurs, as you, Connor. If the person says, I don't really know what I'm trying to do, you got to say, well, then I really can't help you get there. You tell me what you're trying to do, and maybe I can help you get there. And you're right. It's really hard to nail it. It's really hard to hit the kind of combination of factors that make your company very valuable. It's always a combination of the macroeconomy, your company itself, and then your own attitude, your own, resilience. And those three come together, and then good things happen or they don't.
Lewis, I want to ask you about the Birthing of Giants Fellowship Program. What is it now, and where do you see it going in the next few years?
Birthing of Giants is really designed to help you figure out, given the trend of all this money looking for a place to land, and given the terms under which that money could come to you, it's basically built around two metaphors that seem to have nothing to do with each other. The first is that we are all fish swimming in water, meaning if you ask a fish what it's like to swim in water, they can't answer that because they've never not swum in water. We grew up in this entrepreneurial climate, and most of us don't really understand capitalism or even really understand entrepreneurship in the context of capitalism versus, let's say, scaled up corporate companies or even crony capitalism. There's different kinds of capitalism, and we are purveyors of entrepreneurial capitalism. And if you don't understand the fundamentals about private property and the rule of law and a liberal republic and all these kind of concepts that inform our form of capitalism, you're kind of like a fish swimming in water. You are surrounded by it, you're dependent on it, but you know nothing about it, right? The second metaphor is the old Wayne Gretzky saying, which is, I don't go to where the puck is, I go to where it's going to be. And that's what entrepreneurs have to do to be successful. They have to say, here's where I want to be when the right moment arrives. And yet most of them, and I understand, and I do this too, most of them are stuck in today, right? That's Wayne Gretzky saying, I don't go where the puck is. That's today. You have to go where the puck is going to be, and that's tomorrow. And so entrepreneurs who, again, are practitioners of capitalism without fully understanding capitalism, have to understand the role of strategy. They're great tacticians. They have to understand the role of strategy in getting there. And, those are fun things. So in Birthing a Giants, we try to inform this person how to be a strategist and how to be a capitalist. And the short way of saying that would be, so the course, Birthing Giants, is 5 days long. It's a serious boot camp. I mean, it's hardcore, painful, 12-hour day boot camp. But within that week, by the time you're done 5 days later, you've essentially made like 3 years worth of progress in your business, because we've simulated the outcome of your business in so many ways, to the point where you've just, instead of making years worth of mistakes, we made them in a week and got out the other end.
Lewis, is there any companies that you find exciting that have gone through the program that you feel like you might want to highlight?
This is the important thing. Let's say you're an operator of a company. Let's just say it's a fairly mundane, like a roofing or heating, ventilation, air conditioning. It kind of like where we started, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for the application of technology. And you have to have a very broad-minded idea of what technology is. So, for example, the butcher in the program, where she knew different ways to cut up the cow because she's a butcher, and she sold the 10 best cuts of meat to the restaurants, and they only ever wanted those 10 best cuts. Her technology was butchering the cow, where she got like 90 other cuts out of it, and created an entire e-commerce channel, which made her business way more valuable. And her technology was butchering. Okay, not all tech is software. Sometimes it's with a knife and got blood and guts. So you have to have a very open-minded idea of what you can do to add intellectual property or technology value to your business. And then the second is, you have to have as I've said a couple times now, an idea of where you want to go. And when you put those two together, you'll probably come up with wildly different businesses than the one you're in. Either you'll take your HVAC business and you'll buy 10 other HVAC businesses, or your HVAC business will be transformed through the implementation of some kind of intellectual property, proprietary tech. One or the other, sometimes both, but it doesn't have to be both. You really have to do one or the other. You have to scale or you have to iterate. One or the other.
One thing that I saw recently is that you've gone in on a specific company called Aegis Response. Do you want to share that background origin story?
You can imagine, because my students are owners of pretty big businesses, and we love business, so we're always talking about business. And one of my students came up to me, this is a year and a half ago, and says, I have an idea for a business, and I'm happy to listen to great ideas. Usually that's all I do. And at the end of it, I said, that's the perfect business. You've described the perfect business. So let me give a kind of a mindset to your listeners. The perfect business is one that maximizes wealth creation while mitigating risk. Now notice, I didn't say minimizing risk, because there is always risk in business development, but you mitigate risk. And so how do you mitigate risk is found in the model itself. And so this business was the idea that most police departments in America are suffering from a staffing shortage of uniformed officers, about roughly 10% across the board. And if you look at the effect it has on 911 response times, it's dramatic, because it's not just a 10% reduction in 911 response. It completely collapses. And, if you call a police 911 for something, it could be 2 hours before they get there, depending on how emergent it is. So what we're doing is we're essentially taking the retiring police officers from a department and leasing them back to the same department to take on non-priority police work. What's powerful about that is that every stakeholder, I've never seen a business where every stakeholder wants it. The chief wants it, the retiring cops wants it, the union wants it, the mayor wants it, the city council wants it, the citizens want it. Non-priority police work is usually things like fender benders. So if you've ever been in a fender bender and sat on the side of the road, you want it too, because we'll get there much faster and take care of it. And so every stakeholder wants it. But the beauty of the business is that we essentially don't have to invest any money into starting up a city until we have a contract. And those contracts are incredibly forecastable, because January in Boston is going to have roughly the same number of accidents as last January and last January and last January. And so this high predictability of your staffing and your resources, high predictability in your cash flow. It's just the perfect business model for maximizing wealth creation and mitigating risk.
I like what you said about getting all the stakeholders aligned. Like, that's a pretty good sign. How is it going so far?
So we're 1 year into execution. The one problem in the sauce here is that it's not a problem. We all knew it going in, is that governments, but particularly municipalities and state level governments, take their time. So closing our deals is taking time. And that's it. We literally have not gotten a no from any city. We've gotten we'll start the process. It's going to take some time, but we'll get through that. So otherwise we have the cities that are interested, which I can't reveal here, are super interested. And they're kind of like technology leaders, progressive leaders in terms of the adoption of new ideas to manage cities. The other funny thing about it, just to go political for half a second, is it's the most nonpartisan idea ever. Mayors of American cities tend to be Democratic. Governors tend to be Republican. Law enforcement tends to be, somewhere in between. And so you have, politics-wise, you have found the perfect nonpartisan idea. People like it because it puts fewer cops on the street with guns. It puts cops into better cop stuff where you need a gun. It's, more citizen-friendly. It uses money better. It's like this perfect nonpartisan idea.
I see this with nursing and with doctors quite a bit. It makes me wonder what other areas do we have like a gap in service?
I know a lot of younger entrepreneurs look to kind of consumer type products to kind of make their bones on. But the truth is the easier path, meaning maximize wealth creation while mitigating risk, is to sell your product to bigger institutions where their buying power is a little bit more clear. In other words, if you want to sell a product to a consumer, well, you're now competing with Coca-Cola because they're also trying to get to that consumer. And, nobody has the budget of Coca-Cola. But if you're trying to get a hospital system or a state government, a university to buy your product or service, the sales process is extremely slow, but it's also pretty well documented. And you can go after it and go after it and go after it. And my advice to all the young entrepreneurs is if you want to maximize wealth creation while mitigating risk, you're going to go after larger institutions like Fortune 500 companies, like hospital systems, like governments that can buy your stuff in a much more kind of focused and concentrated buying pattern.
It's easy to fall into that trap of I'm going to build a flashy tech product or sell directly to consumers. That's what we're exposed to.
Yeah. And, the capital investment world, meaning angels, venture capitalists, I mean, I don't mean to knock that population, but a lot of them are looking for a sexy story. They want to be at the country club and say, I just invested in a company that's going to Mars or whatever. It's just a more fun story than saying I'm just invested in a company that provides nurses to, rural health systems.
Established entrepreneurs are blown away whenever we find out that someone made a lot of money in an industry that we have no idea about.
My school is filled with entrepreneurs who made money in industries that no one's ever heard of. But I mean, there's just great businesses to be found in little spaces. And when you want to reduce fail factors, I mean, this is the other truth that is not perfect for young entrepreneurs. And I was a young entrepreneur and I did market to consumers, so I'm familiar with it. But the truth is, if you go into a profession, in other words, do your 5 or 10 years in something and just keep your eyes wide open, you're going to find the niche. You're going to find the thing that, your company doesn't want to do because it's too small for your company to do. But if you did it, it would be pretty big. So that's how you build your network. That's how you build your domain knowledge. That's how you build your reputation. That's how you start assembling your team, is by going and working at, AT&T or whatever, and wait and find the niche that no one else has found.
Invite that luck into your life, guys.
Yeah. Serendipity is a huge part of success.
Lewis, thanks for the chat. I really appreciate it. Where should people go to find you?
birthingofgiants.com. And I'm on LinkedIn and I love to connect with people there. If you're the owner of a company with 5 million to 500 million in revenue and you want to, compress 3 years worth of banging your head against the wall into 1 week, that's our person.
Thank you so much, Lewis. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Connor.
That wraps up today's episode. For more inspiring stories and valuable lessons from successful entrepreneurs, be sure to listen and subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and writing your next chapter.